Okay, so the topic I want to discuss and share with all of you today is a source of our strength. I think this is a very relevant time and relevant topic for this conference because, yes, coaches support your client, but the ultimate goal, I think, for both the coach and the client themselves is to find strength within. From strength, we'll have wisdom. From wisdom, we'll have choices. And from choices, there will be impact, both on ourselves and on the world we engage in different aspects of our lives. But this, at the same time, also seems to be a challenging task because we seem to live in an age of crisis. If we simply take a snapshot of the overview of any news outlet or look at our social media friends, it's very easy to come to the conclusion that the world seems to be in constant stress. As we speak now, there are overt military conflicts. There are covert disagreements between different countries, different culture, different organizations. And if you look at some of the repressive regimes, the number actually happened to be on the rise. You will see chains on liberty, you will see an absence of justice, and seemingly there will be triumph of the dark. So when we are faced with this external world, the question becomes, how should we be in this reality? Because the power of individuals and even organizations seems to be so weak compared with the dominating external forces. And I think for everybody in the coaching profession, you already know the answer. The way out is in. But this is at the same time a very challenging task because it's very hard to look in, especially when we see the disturbances outside. But we probably all know intellectually through our mind, through our experiences, through all the readings we do, that every external dilemma actually has an internal root. And then the root is within each and every one of us. In a way, this is hard to accept because when we look at external challenges and all the things that happen which we disagree with, it's very hard to accept there is an internal root within ourselves because obviously we do not agree with it. But actually, if we do peel down to our thoughts or our logic or arguments, we will actually see that the root is within each one of us. The reason it's important to discuss, I think, for everybody engaged in coaching, actually, I don't think myself is, officially part of this profession. But yes, through my network and the communities we have in a way embarked on a similar mission of understanding what can we do when faced with external dilemma, and what path can we take in walking out of that dilemma. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about your client, the organizations you're working with, or yourself, because at the end of the day, only way each individual of us were able to have the ability to look inward and find internal root, we cannot really help anybody we're trying to help with. So in this sense, I think waking up simply means to start looking for the cause of our disturbances inward. Just now, I used examples of all the external macro trends, things you read in news. But actually, lots of the disturbances we face are micro. Those are the conflicts we have with a colleague. This is a difficult conversation we have to have with our loved ones. Those are anxieties we face when we're raising our children. So it doesn't matter if it looks small or look big as those that made the headline of the news. Actually, the practice is the same, is to start looking for the causes of our disturbances inward. But that is actually quite hard to do because the internal world seems to be very ragged. And if we use an example of a landscape of a planet, and oftentimes our internal world seems to be the most foreign planet. If we use the comparison of having the rover that land on Mars to map out what's the landscape like. We have not been able to do that well with our internal world. So yes, of course, we aspire to a peaceful thing like this, like that's how we feel internally. But in reality, what happens is that we have a lot of disturbances, we have a lot of blockages, we have a lot of strong emotions that's hard to track the source to. And when all these things are at force together, it's actually very hard for us to be the mirror we need to be when we are coaching somebody, or be the container we need to be when we're trying to help the individual in front of us. I know everybody online, although I cannot see you, which is certainly a disadvantage of a meeting of this format. But I know each one of you, if you're participating in this conference, you have been on this journey already. You have been looking hard internally, and you have been having those questions yourselves as well. So today I actually invite you, let's just spend 2 minutes together to do this small meditation. Meditation maybe seems to be sort of out of accord with a conference, right? Because conference, we should be very serious. We have PowerPoints, we have discussions, everybody have big titles. But I think since we're talking about coaching, since we're talking about exploring and supporting the internal growth to accessing our internal strength, I would invite everyone to just be kind to ourselves. Let's, for a moment, put aside our thought of coaching somebody else or serving our client, but just think about having a moment to look within ourselves. So I invite you to find a place to sit well, no matter where you are. I know you're in front of a screen. I'll actually turn off my video for a moment to make it more like a meditative experience. You can do the same if it's easier for you. So just sit down and relax. And allow yourself to take 2 deep breaths. Deeply breathe in. And deeply breathe out. Continue your breath when you hear me talking. Bring the picture you just saw in front of you. The one with sunshine, with trees, with water. And don't try to describe it, just feel it. Can you feel the life inside? Can you feel the energy inside? Can you feel the flow inside? Continue breathing. Have that image surround yourself. The sunshine, the trees, the roots, the stream. Try to experience the warmth of the sun. Imagine yourself basking in it. Try to hear the running water. Imagine you putting your finger and toe inside it. And also try to smell the leaves from the big trees, from the bushes, and even from the moss on the tree bark. Just allow yourself to immerse in it. And you can slowly now open your eyes and bring your attention back to now. So after having a chance to go deeper into ourselves, let's take a look outside. Many of you might know this image. This is the pillar of creation. On the left is a picture taken by the Hubble telescope in 1995. And on the right is a one taken by James Webb, just October 2022. This is a cloud of existence that is about 7,000 light years away from us. And what we see here is really a cloud of star formation. It's the nebula. It's when new stars are born. I think there are two things remarkable about it. One is that this is 7,000 light years away, meaning every piece of light we see on this picture actually emitted 7,000 years ago for the light to travel, right? And if we imagine that peak of light around that time, that was before any civilization in the human world existed in any, like, in any substantive form. That's 7,000 years. If we're talking about 5,000 BC. So the picture we see now were actually from the light before most of our civilization existed. The number two thing that's remarkable is the connection we actually have with this star formation. Sometimes we forget that we are actually made of stars. Every element in Earth and in our human world on Earth are formed during star formation. The air, the oxygen molecule, hydrogen to start with, all the metals, the metal in our blood, the iron, the copper, were from the stars. And then all the metal that made up this conference, like the chips, the lens of its silicon, that's also from the star formation process. So everything actually in the mundane world we see, which seems nothing exciting at all if we keep looking at this glass or keep looking at this piece of metal or looking at our fingers, but actually we're part of the stars. So oftentimes when we are absorbed in our crisis, one of the reasons is we forget this massive connection we have with the massive universe, both in terms of longitude, on time scale, and in just how abundant they are in our actual daily life. When we see this picture and looking at ourselves again, we know even we are just sitting here looking at a screen. Yes, you see my image, you see my face, you see my hair. Of course, I couldn't see yours, but I know you're similar to me. But we also know this physical body is only a physical body. We have energy, we have emotional body, we have wisdom body, we have bliss body. And then the bliss body is connected with the stars, with all the elements, with the formation of stars. So when we have this connection, it's actually liberating. And the liberating gave us wisdom to access our strength. When we have that view, we will break down this external versus internal barrier we see. For example, color, as simple as color. If we do very fundamental physics, we know the visible spectrum is merely a very tiny segment of the range of frequencies. So Paul Klee, which is an artist, said this. He said, color is the place where our brain and the universe meet. So color isn't merely this label we see on the barrel of paint we buy. As something maybe even just as mundane as that, the label on the color of paint, on the barrel of paint we buy, is actually something very profound, because every color is where our brain and the universe meet. We see certain color doesn't mean there's only that color. It only means our brain can only access or process that color. And seeing that, on the one hand, actually, of course, broadens our view. And second, also make us realize lots of the external world, the so-called external world we see, are merely a mirror we can process with ourselves. So therefore, one thing that gave me a lot of strength, when I feel stuck in situations that's challenging, is this. It says, you're not looking out at the world. The world is coming into you through your senses, just like the visible spectrum coming into us through our eyes. And that have a paradigm shift in understanding the connection between the so-called external circumstances or challenges and the internal world, and make that connection direct and transparent. When we understand this, we'll start to see that we actually have a part to play in the so-called external crisis. For example, this word involution, in Chinese 内卷, which has been a very popular word, for many years, talking about this collective competitiveness that drives anxiety in everybody. Yes, we can blame that on our neighbor. We can blame that on the other company. We can blame that on, our peers. But if we really look into it, involution or 内卷 is simply the collective manifestation of the unmanaged fear in each individual. When we have fear about missing out, about being eliminated in the system, instead of facing that fear, what do? We actually try to gear up to compete. We try to do things in our overtime. We try to over-deliver in school. We try to make the curriculum harder. And when everybody does it, and it just basically that's the result, it's involution. So this is not something external. It's simply the collective manifestation of the unmanaged fear in each individual. When we see this, we will change our mindset from blaming or resentment into look within. So when we have a fear, just like the one we have in this hyper-competitive world, what fear does is that it blocks the flow of wisdom, of energy. And then the wisdom and energy is something everyone has. And when we are in the fear mode, when we're afraid of losing, just like this picture on the right, this man is standing there because he's afraid of losing the few things he's holding very tightly. All these things collectively may cost $20. But when he's afraid of losing them, what happened is that he loses his liberty or freedom entirely. This picture is so insightful, I think, because it described our human dilemma or predicament in such a precisely insightful way. I think every one of us, of course myself too, can see ourselves in that position. That's what fear does. Fear blocks us from choices. And when we think we have no choices, we actually blame on those bottles of lotions But actually, no, it's not because of this bottle of solutions. It's our ability or lack of ability to face our fear. And when we have this unmanaged fear inside, the collective blockage became our reaction to the world. This is a real picture taken at a river, which when there's enough blockage, you see the waterway changes. And this waterway become what's visible. And we call it, okay, this is how this water is. It's actually not how the water is, but the blockage became our reaction to the world. And when we have a collective reaction, it will then become the so-called external crisis. Therefore, saying this will lead everybody to ask this question, saying what force is directing our choices in life, in career, in business decisions? Sometimes they say, hey, I'm being directed by the voice inside. But what exactly is their voice? Is that the voice of the flow of the waterway, or is the voice of the blockage? Oftentimes it's the latter, but we're mistaking it for the former. Therefore, when we think about liberation, it's about liberating ourselves from ourselves. It's about removing the blockages that has been unconsciously built up over the years. And this might be from our family, from our culture, from our society, and from the so-called norms. But only when we actually see this part within ourselves, we can break free. And only when we can break free, we can actually make changes in the causes we devote ourselves to. How to change, you may ask? Of course, there are a lot of leadership theories. I think all the B schools, all the professors are putting out wonderful work. But on the other hand, we can also see the ancient wisdom actually has the current answer. This is from ancient Buddhism. It's saying there are three core elements. It's the Buddha, which is the original nature, means it's everyone. It doesn't mean it's the Buddha. It's Buddha is in everyone who's listening today, everyone who's not listening today. The original nature is precious. And the second one is Dharma, which is the compassionate teaching. I think many of you in the coaching industry are basically propagating this Dharma. And there is also Sangha, which is the community. So at the end of the day, any change happens when the three forces work together. We have the belief in every individual, we have the teaching, and we have the community working together. And when we understand this, I think both as coaches or as leaders, we will know that if we're after is authentic adult growth, it happens at three levels. It happens at the learning level, which is the brain. There are a lot of theories, good practices that's been put forward over the years, especially in the coaching industry. Really kudos to you guys who have been building this industry and have been really advocating for its growth as well. It also happens deeper than learning. It happens at experience level. The experience we probably all know, especially for us in coaching or for you in coaching, adult growth or adult learning happens through experience. And eventually is through awareness, because awareness is the foundation of change. Or if you use a simple framework used in education, we say education need to have a three-pronged approach: the brain, the hand, and the heart. And that's exactly true even for adults. It's the brain, the hand, and the heart. But in addition, you also need the community, the field, or the Sangha, which I think is also part of what this conference or what this community is trying to do. So when everybody's aware of all the core elements here, then fundamental changes have the precondition to take place. So the most difficult part of what we just talked about is actually creating and extending awareness. Awareness is the foundation of everything. I think this is nothing foreign to this community. But although we understand it, we talk about it, it's actually hard to do. So today I'll take advantage of this online opportunity. Let us all do a 1 minute awareness. I think we all have 1 minute. So I'm going to set a timer, and I will ask all of you in this 1 minute to be aware of the deeper being of yourself. Whatever the disturbances you had when listening to this talk, whatever thoughts you have during the process, let's take 1 minute together for you to be aware, to create some distance from the substance, the PPT I'm sharing, to you. All right, so I'm going to, on the count to 3, 1 minute will start. And let's have a 1 minute practice of awareness. 3, 2, 1, start. Time's up. I wonder, how do you feel? How many thoughts went through your mind? Did it feel really long? What reactions you had to yourself? Were you calm? Were your mind chaotic? Were you thinking, when's time up? Why is it so long? Why are we doing this? I think that's what it is. A 1 minute feels very long, isn't it? But actually, we have so many 1 minutes, even just in this conference, let alone in the day, in a week, in a month, in a year. So I think we asked source of our strength. Through this process, I think we kind of all know intellectually the answer. And then the challenge for us as human beings, of course, also in capacity as coach, as business leader, is living it. And living it requires the change at the level of being. Starts with being different. And the reality is, just like a tree, everything starts from the root. When we can start to allow ourselves to be different, we will, sorry, the animation didn't work. I'll be aware of it. Imagine yourself, the bee is at the root, and it starts with a do. Do is at the tree trunk. And eventually what you have is the have, which is the branches, the leaves, the beautiful fruits or flowers. So everything starts with be. Being is where the source is, and is also where it's the most difficult to access. But on the other hand, just like what we just practiced, it doesn't have to be that hard. 1 minute, you can actually access it and feel very profound difference within yourself. And with that, when everybody starts to do that, and together, that's how forests form, that's how ecosystem form, that's how the world change. And I'm fortunate to be able to spend some time with a community who are thinking and reflecting on the same topic, and hopefully can be on the same journey with you when creating this ecosystem together. Thank you.
Thank you, Yinuo. I mean, so many amazing concepts there that you've shared with us, but I love the opportunity that you've created for all of us to raise our own awareness and to reflect on how we would like to be, and therefore to create change for ourselves. We do have some time for questions. So of course I would invite our participants to share their questions with us while we have our wonderful speaker still available to us. I guess one of the questions that I had to kick us off, is and perhaps just unmute yourself so that we can share the screen here. What is it that, as a first step, if someone was thinking about, how do I influence, my own world and the reaction that I'm having to it or that I'm creating, what would be, a first step that just about anyone could manage? And you've given us a couple of great exercises in meditation and reflection on awareness. Is there something that you would suggest for us as a first step?
Yes, I do. I think the first step is to breathe. This is very simple and seems like almost a non-answer. I have to say, this is of course not my original answer, and I heard it from many masters. And then the first time I was like, what? How does that help? Especially for myself, like I came from a highly brainy experience, right? So like everything has a PowerPoint, has analysis, has a conclusion, or has the argument. And you would say, hey, that's nonsense. But after this many years of experience, I get what it means. Is because when we are in a challenging situation, the best way out is to access our internal wisdom, and everybody has it. And how do we access it? The first condition is to create some space for the wisdom to come out. And what is that space? It's breathing. When you take 3 deep breaths, something will change quite fundamentally on you, even just 3 breaths, just like what we did in the 1 minute, right? It's just 1 minute doesn't seem to be a long time at all, but having that basically create that space. I think eventually leadership is about this, I call it it's internal fluidity. When we're very rigid, everything comes in will be bounced back, right? There's a word coming, you will talk back. There's an idea coming, you will argue back. And great leaders are all very fluid. Fluid means like when an idea comes in, this idea has a space to air itself out, and there will be responses, there'll be reactions, and then there will be some chemical reactions, and then the idea will become a better idea. But all requires an internal fluidity. And so the easiest way to get the internal fluidity is through breathing. It's very simple. So that's my answer. But I know there might be a lot of questions in your mind if you haven't experienced it yourself, but it does take practice. But I think that is the answer.
Wonderful. And look, I would absolutely agree. When I studied M-branding a number of years ago, the emphasis on how do you create a bridge into yourself was through breath. And so I'm absolutely with you there. I think, and of course, it's something that you can control. And I think that in a world out of control or seemingly out of control, anything that we can do to create, a sense of control and empowerment, but also a sense of creating space, as you've talked about, and choice, I think is wonderful. And so I would absolutely encourage all of our participants to experiment with their breath, with their breathing, with creating those moments in time of space. And after some practice, I almost guarantee you that you will notice a difference and an opportunity. Okay, I have a lovely question here for you. If you can liberate yourself, you are not yourself. My question is, how can you liberate yourself from relying on yourself?
That's an excellent question. I think that's why a word has its limits. When we see ourselves or myself, even in this question, actually, each time you're meaning different things. So one thing I borrowed, is not my original, I actually put in my book, is saying when we talk about the me, the myself, we actually talk about 4 levels. The first level is me, things happen to me. Okay, like, you know, I got into a car accident. All right, so that's the me. So basically that's the small me, I call it, right? And then the second level is, okay, things happened. Okay, then that's, well, I was just part of it. Okay, so I was part of it. The other person driving the car is also part of it. So this just happened. Okay. And then the third level, when we talk about me, we could say, hey, things happen for me. Right. So like it's somehow, yes, of course, I don't think this is benefiting me, but this is just like the typical story in Chinese called 7十马焉知非福. Like when something bad happened, maybe there's something good. Yes, maybe you got into this car accident, but maybe that reminds you to fix your car, which, you know, protect you from further bigger accident happening down the road. So then that me is already detached, right? So it's not a small me anymore. Oh, why, you know, I get into a car accident. And then eventually the fourth level is like things happening through me. Through me means like, okay, this things happen. Just like I tell the story, just like the guy who wrote down that story, like, you know, years ago about, you know, this guy who lost his horse, you know, then they become a good thing, like, you know, everything blessing, you know, it's a blessing in disguise. So think about that guy who, I don't know, 2,000 years ago wrote down that story, right? So he enabled that wisdom to be passed on till today. So that myself is a bigger self. You probably don't even know his name. You don't know how he looks like, but his being allowed this wisdom to be accessible for everyone. So that's why when you were talking about liberating me from me, we're liberating the small me. We're liberating the big me from the small me. It's different, although the words seem to be same. That's why psychology or internal world is so complex, because our language doesn't help us in that. You know, our language, you know, oftentimes confuse us, saying, oh, we're talking about me, exactly that question. But at least having that awareness, like even I'm talking about myself, yourself, we're talking about different things at different layers. And once you have that clarity, it helps you mapping out our internal landscape.
Beautiful. Great explanation. And I think, you know, if I go back to some of the elements that you spoke to during your session around, you know, it really is, in terms of our learning and our own development, having awareness and actually having an awareness of the levels of me will be fundamental to being able to create that sense of liberation, or, you know, creating that true liberation. But that requires us to look inwards and to spend some time with that. And sometimes I feel like, you know, we live in a bit of a crazy world. Sometimes it feels like there's a lot of complexity and there's just a lot going on. And so I think it's really fundamental, if we want to develop ourselves as humans, that we do create deliberately spaces and opportunities to do that reflection, to create that awareness, you know, to develop our liberation and to free ourselves from some of the things that do, you know, get in the way of us being the fullest version of ourselves.
Exactly. We're all pieces of stars.
Yeah. Which I have to say, I'm just going to tell everyone I'm a star now. I love that.
You are, of course.
Beautiful, so, beautiful.
Physically proven.
Well, I like that even more. If it's got some real solid evidence behind it, that's amazing. A couple of other questions are coming through, in fact, a lot, but let me just cherry pick some that are coming up for me. So there's a question around asking for any particular suggestions or approaches while trying to surpass those life critical edges or moments.
Yeah, I think I had a lot of eye-opening moments when reading all the work by Thich Nhat Hanh. So Yixing Chanshi in Chinese. So he had this beautiful saying, says, "A cloud never dies," and describing his life as a cloud. Yes, of course, he died. And during his lifetime, if you didn't know, he actually went through tremendous hardship. He was exiled by Vietnam for 39 years. And he just, but even before that, he was in the midst of war. He lost his, best friends. And then like there are a lot of misery he has gone through, both himself and witnessed. So he had offered a lot of wisdom. I dare not to say I have such wisdom, but I think we all can learn a lot from these masters. And one of the things he say around these things is basically the generation of compassion. The compassion both to, maybe it's easier to ourselves. Let's say, we start, instead of be critical of ourselves, judging ourselves, which is so common to many people, especially to women in business, but also compassion to your enemy. And then the enemy, he had this tiny little book, which I'm reading now, called How to Fight. I actually have this right here, called How to Fight, and talked about how do you deal with that, right? How do you deal with anger? How do you deal with frustration? How do you deal with aggression? And then eventually all the answer is about having compassion, saying that even the person or the situation who's creating misery for you, they are doing that because they are captured by their own fear. So they were not doing this out of their big self. They're doing it out of their small self. So once you see that, although it seems like you haven't really solved the problem, but your being level start to change. You start to have compassion towards even the enemy, even the most annoying person, the most, the one who committed a crime. And from that moment, he said, wisdom will rise on how to deal with the situation, how to be different. So I think we all have a lot to learn. Again, I'm merely quoting him, but I think people like him had gone through and endured so much and had this drops of wisdom in their words, which can serve us all.
Amazing, thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, so let me just give you a little bit of an open space. There was a single comment that said, can you talk more about Buddha? So in our couple of minutes, what can you share there?
Yeah, I think it was so interesting. So I came to revisit it, after I've gone through sort of the business world, right? So we know all the, of course, everybody who's in leadership, in business, talk about organizational sort of frontiers, like what are things for support adult learning, effective organization. And it's very interesting when you start reading the classics of Buddhism 3,000 years ago, even longer. Of course, a lot of things probably get lost in translation through the years, but I think they've figured it out. It's like, that's the three components they talk about. They say everything for any change, it's the three things. It's the Buddha. The Buddha doesn't mean, Gautam, Siddhartha, like that person. It means, and that's the wisdom of Buddhism, is that it's everyone. So like, and if you're really getting the sense, it's even like every grass, every piece of, flower and everything. So like, but it's basically saying it's sort of the pillar of creation picture we see, right? So if you think about it, that doesn't even have life, but it's the foundation of life. It's the foundation, it's the source of creation. And that source of creation isn't this old guy up in the sky. The source of creation is within every one of us. So that's the sense of Buddha. So I think that's very empowering. If so saying that we don't need some external person to come here and save us. It's actually within each one of us. And then of course you need the Dharma. Dharma is like your pathway of accessing that wisdom. We do need to understand, for example, what is me, right? Like, why am I angry? Things like that. Like, the basic of psychology, how does organization work? All the learnings and knowledge we have are pathway to it. And eventually you need Sangha, which is community. I think this community is something get lost in modern society, which we tend to think, okay, if I have this, cutting edge technology, I'm going to surpass all of you. I don't need any of you. So I think that's a tragedy in a way. But we kind of underestimated the power of community. and then the power of empathy, the power of connection. Because again, if we use the picture of the star, at the star level, we are all one, right? When you die, when I die, we go back to stardust. And then, so our stardust is filled with, people who have died, of course, physically, but where do they go, right? So that's why in Buddhism, they talk about reincarnation. Of course, if you're in science, it's where's the proof? But again, we don't have to go into the details of that. But I guess the belief behind it is that you don't go anywhere. You're still here. You're just, so like, then in that sense, we are connected. Everybody's connected. Although maybe you don't know me, you're not my friend, we didn't grow up together. But the ability for us to see a piece of news for some crisis happening in a foreign country and feel sad, that's because, we are connected. And that connectivity is something being underplayed in the industrial world. So I think if you look at that three elements, it's true for everyone. If you talk about a company, right? You have a vision, okay, you have a dharma, okay, which is your product pathway or whatever roadmap. You have a Buddha, which is every employee you have, and you have this community you build, right? So you can work on a small scale, you can work on a large scale, you can talk about a culture, you talk about a country, it's all the same. So when we adapt that mindset, we will look at things differently, even when we're just building a company with 3 people, or if we're working with a school, or you're working with like for you guys working with a community of coaches. It's the same thing, and the 3 of them are equally important. There isn't like the priority or hierarchy of one. So I think that kind of concept is, in a way, let's say it's ancient but very current, very modern as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing some amazing thoughts, wisdom, and immediate opportunities for us today. I can see all of the amazing comments that are coming through. So please take a moment to go and check that out and see how much the audience has appreciated what you've shared with us today. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Thank you for the opportunity. All right. Bye-bye.